All right, folks, starting chapter 2 today. So we'll dive right in. Module 2, I guess they want to call them, Choice in a World of Scarcity. Okay, so there's a couple of different ways we can look at this idea that we don't have enough for everybody to get everything they want. So if you're just talking about an individual, like you might be studying in microeconomics, then you can use something called a budget constraint. And a budget constraint is just a way of modeling the various combinations of goods that you can get given how much those goods cost and how much money you have to spend. In this case, our budget constraint is looking at burgers and bus tickets, and we have $10. Okay, so at $2 a burger, we can buy at most 5 burgers. But if we put all of our money towards 5 burgers, we have no money left over for bus tickets. Similarly, we can buy as many as 20 bus tickets. But if we buy 20 bus tickets, we have no money left over for food. We're going to be hungry before the end of the day, right? Okay? Those are budget constraints. Sunk costs are the costs that you have incurred that you can't recover. Okay? You can't get that money back. It's gone. That's the very nature of it having been sunk, right? Opportunity cost, again, that is the cost of the choice you're making, right? And we will calculate that in a moment. And really, the opportunity cost is the slope of this budget constraint in this case. All right. So, and I'll show you momentarily how to calculate it. It's really easy, much easier than they try to do it. Okay. Now, you can do budget constraints based on the fact that your budget is limited in terms of money, but you also have a very finite budget of time. You can similarly do a budget constraint with regards to how much time you have. Okay? So, because we don't have enough and we have to make choices, every choice has a trade-off. The cost of that trade-off, we call that the opportunity cost. It doesn't matter how many goods you have to choose from. Every choice you make has an opportunity cost. In other words, if I spend $1 on this pair of shoes, that's $1 I don't have on this shirt over here. All right? So it doesn't matter, or pants, or whatever else there might be. All right? So, opportunity cost. And we're going to assume for our purposes that sunk costs do not impact the choice you make. You're not considering sunk costs. Those costs that are incurred that you can't recover won't affect your current decision-making process. Okay? This is how they tell you to calculate it. Okay. I'll let you have the next day and a half to do that calculation. I'll show you a better way, I think. All right, so here we are. And really what what we're asking here is, what is the opportunity cost of a bus ticket? All right? I know, for example, that if I put all of my money, my entire budget towards bus tickets, I can buy 20 bus tickets. Similarly, if I put all my money towards burgers, I can buy 5 burgers. So I know that I am giving up 5 burgers for every 20 tickets I buy. I know that's the case. For every 20 tickets I buy, I'm not going to be able to buy those 5 burgers. But I want to know, what is the opportunity cost of a single ticket? So it's really quite simple. You're comparing ratios here. So as I said, you're giving up 5 burgers for 20 bus tickets, to buy 20 bus tickets. So put 5 over 20. And you want to know how many. There's your unknown. Put equals, put an X line under that for the fraction bar, 1 underneath that. And that's it. 5 over 20 equals X, because X over 1 is just X, isn't it? What is 5 over 20? 1/4. Okay? Reduces to 1/4. 5 goes into 20 4 times. Goes into itself 1 time. 1/4. Okay? The opportunity cost of a bus ticket is 1/4 of a burger. Really, what you would typically suggest is, for every 4 tickets you buy, you give up a burger. Now, coincidentally, every burger you buy, you give up 4. So remember this. Once you've got the ratio for one good, you just invert that sucker and you have it for the other good, right? 1 burger for every 4 bus tickets is equivalent to 4 bus tickets for every burger. You just flip it upside down. Okay, very easy. The budget constraint is useful when you're looking at a single person's budget. as you might do in a microeconomics class. But what if you're in a macroeconomics class and you're not looking at a single person's budget? You're looking at everybody's, all at the same time. What we call aggregate, the whole economy, the aggregate economy, or at least multiple households, multiple firms, multiple businesses, multiple markets. In that case, we use something called the production possibilities curve, or frontier, production possibilities frontier. Either one works, okay? And this is simply a diagram that's going to show the productively efficient combinations of two products that an economy can produce given the resources it has available. Now, I know what you're thinking. There are no economies that produce only two goods. Fair enough. But every economy, all the goods they produce can be categorized in one of two ways, as either a consumer good or a capital good. Remember, capital goods are those human-made tools we use to produce other stuff. So anything we make is either a consumer good or a capital good. And now we can pretty much break the economy down kind of neatly. So as I said, individuals face the budget and time constraints. Societies face the constraint of having not enough resources. There's not enough labor, not enough land, not enough capital, not enough raw material, etc. Because at any given moment, we don't have enough, there's a limit on how much we can produce. Because resources are limited, the amount and the variety of products we can produce is limited. Okay? So here's a production possibility curve. Notice that it's bowed out. There's a name for that. Some of you may have heard of this in calculus, for example. There's a name for a graph that looks this way. It's called concave to the origin. Whoop-dee, right? That's what it's called. But that shape is important to us, and I'll explain why in a little bit. Okay? So, because the production possibility frontier isn't looking at a single person's budget, but it's looking at the whole nation's budget of resources, there's a lot larger numbers on that axis. Now you're talking about, millions of tons of consumer goods and capital goods on an annual basis, something like that. Okay? Budget constraint is a nice straight line, nice linear relationship. Typically, our production possibility curve is going to be bowed out. Now, you can do a linear production possibility curve, and here's the thing about the linearity of a budget constraint or production possibility curve, and why you would prefer that. A linear production possibility curve or budget constraint implies that the opportunity cost, whatever you're giving up to produce more of this good, right? You're giving up something on this axis to produce more of what's on this axis, right? That opportunity cost will be constant. It doesn't matter how much more you produce. You're giving up the exact same amount of the other good to do so. That bowed out shape suggests that your opportunity cost, for example, in this case, as you increase the production of education, and the production of healthcare falls, the amount of that healthcare you're giving up to produce an additional unit of education is going to be increasing. Now, this book does not call it this, but almost every book I've ever taught from in the past has defined that as the law of increasing opportunity cost. Don't worry about it. You don't need it for this class now, but that's what we're talking about here. And it's always going to be the case when you have this bowed out. You won't have a nice constant opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is going to be increasing or decreasing. They're suggesting here that when you're allocating only a single scarce resource, the trade-off or the budget line is going to be constant. But if there's more than one scarce resource, then the trade-off will be increasingly. The reason why you have this law of increasing opportunity cost is because the resources used to produce healthcare are not the same resources you would necessarily use to produce education. In other words, what I'm using to make healthcare, I can't just automatically shift that towards education because they're different. What they need, they have different needs in order to produce additional units of education versus healthcare. So there's not this convenient one-to-one movement. They don't transfer that easy. Oftentimes, the resources being used to produce healthcare have to be altered in some way to produce education, or it may take more of the healthcare, the resources used to produce healthcare to produce a unit of education. For their purposes, they're going to refer to this as the law of diminishing returns. It absolutely is, and all this is saying is that as you increase the amount of resources you use to create, in this case, education, the marginal benefit will decline. And it's not so much that the marginal benefit is going to decline. We're going to talk more about marginal benefit and marginal cost. It's that the opportunity cost is going to be increasing. So while your benefit may stay constant, at some point that opportunity cost is going to get to be greater, and you don't want to go past that point. If you've already got a large number of resources committed to education, at some point increasing the amount of resources you're put towards education isn't giving you the same return as you got previously. This is true of any investment, by the way. And that's really what we're talking about, right? We're just investing society's resources, but it's very much like an investment. So that curve, that concave to the origin, that shape of your production possibility curve that's bowed out, right? That suggests that as additional resources are added to education, which is moving left to right on that horizontal axis, the initial gains are large, but they start to diminish. And really, it's more accurate to say, which is true, but really what's happening is your marginal cost is increasing as you do so, and it becomes less a viable choice to increase that. It's not going to get you as much because you're having to give up so much more of your health care to do it. Really what's happening. But they phrased it this way. There's nothing wrong with this. It is truly diminishing returns. Okay? So, a couple of different ways to look at this, and I've never been a big fan of this, but okay. There's really 3 different things you need to know about a production possibility curve. And I'm not testing you over this explicitly, but having some idea of this will help you certainly probably on the final and just generally. Because we're going to return to this model when we talk about growth. In case you're wondering, if you increase the amount of resources society has available to produce goods and services, that your curve is going to shift out, right? It's going to move out. So, in other words, you can produce more, in this case, education and healthcare. Okay? 3 things you need to know for this. Every point inside the curve, in this case, look at our graph on the screen. Point R. Point R and all other points inside my curve denote an inefficient allocation of my resources. At point R and all other points inside the curve, not on the curve, not outside the curve, but are underneath the curve between those 2 axes. All those points, inefficient. You don't want to be there. That's usually when the economy's in recession. It's not producing at full peak efficiency, right? It's not doing its complete, not doing as well as it could. Some resources are being left idle. Looking at point R, I have the resources according to this model. I have more resources that I could put towards education. I have more resources I could put towards healthcare. And they're not, or I wouldn't be at point R. So all points inside the curve denote an inefficient allocation of resources. Points A, B, C, D, and F, and all other points on the curve denote an efficient allocation of resources. That's where you want to be. All right? And that's where productive efficiency occurs. Given the available inputs and technology, you can't produce more of one good without having to decrease the amount of the other goods you're producing. That's when you know you're being productively efficient. Okay? Even if it's at point A or point F, where point A you're producing all healthcare and no education, it is still technically productively efficient because all of your resources are being used to production of one of those. Likewise at point F, even though there's no healthcare being produced, all of your resources are being utilized. Okay? Productive efficiency occurs when you're on the curve. Denotes an efficient allocation of resources. There's one other point. They didn't put it on here. They should, but they didn't. That's okay. Imagine a point outside the curve. Point G, we'll call it. Right? This mythical point G outside the curve and all other points outside the curve denote an impossible allocation of resources. You cannot produce more education than you have the resources for. Even if you gave up all the production of healthcare, at some point you're exhausting your resources and you just can't do more. Outside the curve, impossible. On the curve, efficient. Inside the curve, inefficient. All right. Well, let's go back because I didn't say this. Then there's this idea of allocative efficiency, which is utter nonsense in my opinion. And this is the mix of goods being produced that represents the mix that society most desires. And I would put to you, as evidenced by any election that you watch, the results coming in for, society doesn't know what the heck it wants. Okay, let's stop pretending. You want one thing, I want something else, and the people down the street want something altogether different. Let's just be honest about this. And we have to somehow try to figure out where the middle ground of all that is. But the notion that any such thing like allocative efficiency exists is a myth as far as I am concerned. Now, because every economy faces one of two scenarios. It can be using its resources inefficiently. Okay, we can almost always be more efficient. But to the extent that we can't, either because we lack the political will to, or it's just not worth it, the risks or whatever else, the marginal benefit, marginal cost doesn't weigh right, then we have to decide we're at the best place, and that's where we can be at most efficient right now, given these constraints. Okay, those are all factors that weigh in, subjective as they are, but they're there. But over time, resources grow. You have more labor. You have more capital. It's possible that you have more natural resources, isn't it? I mean, I don't think we can get more solar, more sun, or more wind. We can get more wind turbines. We can get more solar panels. That's not what I said. But I think the sun's pretty much peaking. I don't know about y'all, but my God, has it peaked this summer. There are other resources. You can certainly have more labor. We see that with immigration. And that's why there are arguments in favor of immigration that aren't crazy or insane or anything that has to do with the great replacement or whatever they're talking about out there in La La Land. There are really now I'm not talking about illegal immigration. I think that we have to be careful with that. But generally, having young productive workers come into this country is not necessarily the worst thing, especially since we're facing a potential demographic crisis if we don't. I believe, for example, Japan has faced a similar problem where they're having more people retiring, aging, becoming less productive than there are people behind them coming up to replace them. And that productivity is lost. And we're kind of facing that similar issue. So, but nonetheless, to the extent that you can get more labor, you can get more capital, more entrepreneurial spirit, by gosh, then the economy will grow, right? And that production possibility curve will shift outward. It's economic growth. It's one of the ways you'll see in a macro class. It's the only way in macro. In macro class, you'll see another way of modeling economic growth. We'll talk about that much later. All right. So again, so I mentioned earlier why we want to calculate the opportunity cost. In other words, why you're giving it up. So here we have a situation where Brazil and America is producing sugarcane and wheat. Now you'll notice that America can produce more wheat than Brazil can, assuming the scales are the same on both of these. And likewise, Brazil's producing more sugarcane than America is. Now there's something called an absolute advantage. A country is said to have an absolute advantage when they can produce more of a good, right? So in this case, they're producing more wheat. America is. Or Brazil has an absolute advantage in sugarcane production. They're clearly producing more sugarcane than America is. Again, assuming that our axes have the same scale on them, then it's clear that the sugarcane that Brazil is producing is almost twice what U.S. is producing, and likewise for wheat production in the U.S. relative to Brazil's production, almost twice. So, now, that doesn't really help us much. As you'll find out at the end of the year, you can have an absolute advantage in the production. One country can have an absolute advantage in the production of both goods. Happens all the time, especially America. We frequently have an absolute advantage in the production of both goods. If for no other reason, because if we're talking about wheat and stuff like this, because we have a lot more farmland than a lot of countries do. Nonetheless, what you really want to know is who has a comparative advantage. A country is said to have a comparative advantage in the production of good when it can produce a good at a lower opportunity cost than the other country. That is comparative advantage. And once it's determined that a country has a comparative advantage in the production of good, they will specialize in the production of that good, give up the production of that other good, and instead, the other country by default is going to have a comparative advantage in the production of that other good. So we're going to trade with them. Maximize our production of the one that costs us that we give up the least to produce. That's what opportunity cost is measuring, what we're giving up. Right? We're giving up the least if we produce this good. They're giving up the least if they produce the other good. So we can trade with them. And both sides end up better. And this is really something more for the end of the year. They put it in this chapter. We're talking about it a little bit, but it's really something you'll see more at the end of the year. Okay? Because we trade, and because the good that we are specializing in, the good that we have a comparative advantage in, and the good they have a comparative advantage in, and they're going to specialize in, so total production of both goods is going to go up. And it's just a matter of working out terms of trade. One of the knocks on economics, one of the things people mock the study of economics for, is because we supposedly assume everybody behaves rationally. I call bullshit. No, we don't. I've never once in all of my lectures that I've ever listened to heard a single economist ever suggest that we assume every decision was made in the rational pursuit of one's own self-interest. People are irrational all the time. Don't take my word for it. Pause this video and go watch CNN for 10 minutes. I promise you, or Fox News, or CBS, ABC, NBC News. I promise you, you will find somebody somewhere in this world is behaving irrationally. However, when you look at that behavior in aggregate, when you take in all the choices being made every day by everybody on the planet, guess what? Most of the irrational choices get washed out by the sheer volume of rational choices. You wouldn't hardly notice. So it is reasonable to conclude that, on average, in aggregate, most people make rational choices. And it is rational to pursue your own self-interest. Now, they say this is theory of rational behavior. It's a way of simplifying things so that it's better able to understand human decision making. But it has the added benefit of being true. I'll tell you what, folks. I'm going to make a statement. If you disagree with me, I'm going to ask that you send me an email. All right, it's in my syllabus. Send me an email and tell me why I'm wrong. Here's my statement. Human beings are selfish. Now, I've been using this in almost every economics class I ever taught. Am I wrong? Nobody's ever argued that I'm wrong. Almost everybody in class suddenly develops this sort of weird synchronized head nodding. Okay? I think we all intuitively get that. Now, let's not settle down. Not everybody is equally selfish. Some people are more selfish than others. Surely that's true. It's also true that being selfish does not preclude you from doing selfless acts. You can be selfish and help an old lady across the street, can't you? You can be selfish and adopt a puppy. Right? So, for some reason, people really get all weirded out and up in arms. Like, economics teaches people that selfishness is okay. No, it doesn't. Economics teaches that selfishness is as much a part of the human condition as skin and blood and bone. Are you kidding me? You think the study of economics created selfishness? You think economics really didn't exist as a formal study until arguably Adam Smith wrote Wealth of Nations, published it in, 1776? Attila the Hun was a pretty selfish son of a... I don't think he studied a lot of economics. I could be wrong. But for some reason, economists included, we get very defensive. Now, pursuing our self-interest does not mean that we're greedy or selfish. Sure it does. Sure it does. So, I certainly don't think it's okay to profit off the death and misery of others. I'm not suggesting that's okay. But some people do that, and it didn't take them studying economics to do that, did it? So, being interested in your own self-interest, pursuing your own self-interest, making choices that benefit you, in other words, engaging in what is fair to suggest is, in fact, selfish behavior, maybe even greedy behavior if you're doing it for the sake of making money. All right? To the extent you derive some satisfaction from what you're doing, you're pursuing your own self-interest. It doesn't prevent you from doing things that also help people. Why are donations tax deductible to nonprofit? If you donate money to a nonprofit, to a 501c3, say the animal shelter or PETA or whatever else you're into, don't want to know necessarily. Why do we make that tax deductible? You know why? Because most people wouldn't give their money if we didn't. There's no real incentive to, other than the generosity of their heart. Ain't that sweet? Ain't that precious? I don't mean to be cynical here. I'm just suggesting that I didn't make this world. I didn't have anything to do with it. But after 50 some odd years on this planet, I have come to the conclusion that we are some selfish sons of guns. And I am convinced, feel free to email me and tell me why you think I'm wrong, I am convinced that that is exactly the reason why capitalism works. I believe capitalism has proven to be the single most efficient, effective economic system in the history of humankind, precisely because it says, we know humans are selfish, and we're going to make that an organizing principle behind our economic system. You can't get rid of it. They're going to be selfish. You don't think socialists are selfish? You don't think communists are selfish? Really? It took this fact of the human condition. We are selfish. And it organized our entire economic system around this idea that they're going to be selfish no matter what we do. It doesn't matter. They're going to be selfish. Let's make it somehow benefit us. And it's funny. We don't know exactly why or how. Adam Smith wrote, 1776, we call the book Wealth of Nations, but its full title is An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations. And he wrote in this book, it is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own self-interest. We address ourselves not to their humanity, but to their self-love, and never talk to them of our own necessities, but of their advantages. What's he saying there? What does that mean? To me, he's suggesting that the baker, the brewer, and the butcher don't do what they do so that you don't go hungry. I'm not saying they wish you were starving. We don't live in this nice, comfortably binary world where you just have two options. Either you care or you don't care. You can care that whether someone eats or not, but not give them your food for free. You spent your time cutting that meat, baking that bread, brewing that beer. Your time has value, doesn't it? You're just going to give it away? How is that going to help your family? Don't you have a family you have to support? The butcher, the baker, the brewer, they're doing these things specifically because they have their own families to take care of. They're looking out for themselves. Uno, numero uno, right? But for some reason, economists get very, very, very sensitive and defensive No, we're not saying people are selfish. I am. Sorry. And I don't have any problem, have no qualms about it whatsoever. I'm selfish. I think you're selfish. You may be more or less selfish than I am. I don't know. I don't really care. As long as, does not give you anybody license to go out and hurt other people. Just doesn't. You can be selfish and still be respectful and wish well upon other people. You're going to have a job. You may already have one. Do you not compete with friends at work for advancement? You selfish, greedy. Right? If you think I'm wrong, send me an email. Let me know. All right? All right. Soapbox off. Okay. Now, let's put this in action. Again, rationality suggests that consumers are going to act to maximize their self-interest. Right? They're going to buy the things that give them the most satisfaction. In economics, we call that utility. We'll study that more in microeconomics. That's not really a macro thing. Because macro, we're not looking at a consumer. We're looking at every consumer altogether. But in micro, we will be talking about utility. We actually have a unit to measure a consumer's satisfaction. We call it a util, which is just the first 4 letters of utility. Their utility or satisfaction from a good. Silly economists. Okay? Businesses, on the other hand, they also pursue their own self-interest by or behaving rationally, by maximizing profits. They are going to maximize their profits. That's their purpose. That's how they maximize their self-interest. That's rational for them. All right? So if you're thinking about buying something, the theory of rational behavior suggests that you're going to maximize the benefit and minimize your cost. As the cost of the product increases, it becomes at least slightly less likely that as a consumer you'll choose to buy it. The benefits are going to... It's not that the benefits... You get the same benefit from it probably, but that cost is getting a little too close to overwhelming it, and you don't want to be there if you can help it. So that may outweigh... once the cost outweighs the benefit, you're done. You're definitely not going to do it then. Typically, as long as the benefit outweighs the cost, you'll still make that choice. How does a student who's trying to decide on what major to buy, that's what you're doing, right? I mean, you still have to put in the work for it. It's not enough that you pay for it. So there's a lot of things that can factor a student's decision on a major. What type of career are you wanting? What is your interest? What is the reputation? If you're trying to decide whether or not you want to major in economics, what's the reputation of the economics department at these different schools? All right. What are your own personal preferences? Ooh, business analytics. That's a good one. University of Texas Arlington, where I got my graduate degrees. I went to Tarleton for my undergraduate, but UTA for my graduate. They've got a master's degree in analytics that I would highly recommend if you're quant and you're interested in the business. And look at that one. Find stuff like that. Oh, boy, you're not going to have trouble finding good paying jobs with good benefits. But you'll find that, they're going to be higher salaries. You like math, you like crunching numbers, you like analyzing, you like being analytical and thinking through and solving problems. That one's for you right there. Right? Now let's look at it from a business side. Rather than trying to maximize their utility or satisfaction or happiness, they want to make the most amount of money. Now, I realize that we've turned profit into a 4-letter word. I disagree. I think profit is outstanding. I want more profit myself. I bet most of you do too, if you're being honest. But that's okay. When economists assume that businesses are trying to maximize their profits, then we are able to predict how companies will react to changing conditions. All right? So this is why my problem with free trade, because I think free trade is a myth. There's nothing free about trading with Mexico or China. I'm sorry, there's just not. It is not free because our labor laws are much more further along than theirs are. Now, that's not to say that for Mexico, for example, they do have a minimum wage. They absolutely have a minimum wage. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. I believe it's in the neighborhood of $5 a day. I think near the border with the U.S., it's closer to 7 something a day. But it's only a day. They make less per day, minimum wages, less per day than ours is per hour. So when the choice becomes, should we leave our factory in the U.S., have to pay $20 an hour for labor, have to pay their health care, or we can go across the border, pay them $10 a day, and it's a job they'll love. $10 a day, woo, rolling in it. Pay them $10 a day. Don't have to pay for their health care. Single largest expense for labor cost. First off, the single greatest expense every company has is labor. The cost of labor. We cost the most for them. And the single greatest expense associated with labor, healthcare. All right? So it makes perfect sense, at least it is not irrational, for a company to decide to send their companies to these other places. Now, we could have done tariffs to offset that, right? That's what Trump was arguably trying to do, at least with China. So it is not irrational for a company to move their manufacturing where labor is much less costly. That's not irrational at all. They're looking to maximize their profit. The problem is not that they're greedy and trying to maximize profit. The problem is the policymakers enabled this. You want to know why CEOs today, their salaries with the top 400 or 500 companies, their salaries today are 300 times what the average worker under them makes? You want to know why that is? Because they moved some of that overseas, where they're not having near the labor costs that they did before. What did you think they were going to do? They were going to pass these savings on to you. Our prices were suddenly going to go down. It doesn't happen that way. Never has, never will. It's just not how the economy works. So all that additional savings, guess where it went? CEO made the decision to move them. He gets the benefit from it. All right. Now here we're talking about marginal analysis, right? This idea of examining, you're going to take a look at cost and benefit. Specifically, when we talk about marginal cost and marginal benefit, what we really mean, I know that they say the marginal cost is the difference or change in a cost of a different choice. Fair enough. Marginal implies something quite specific. Marginal is really suggesting that we're going to change the output or input by a single unit and see how much costs change by. Marginal typically is, in my head and the way I think and the way I've always seen it in economics textbooks in the past, marginal really means changing increments by a single unit and then looking at how much the cost change by. Usually marginal cost is constant. Right? If you pay a worker $10 an hour and you add one more worker, guess what? Marginal cost was $10. In other words, the cost of that one additional worker, $10. We'll talk about marginal benefit in a minute. So most decisions are being made not by looking at total cost, but at the marginal cost. How much is it? Does the cost of hiring one more worker outweigh the benefit? In other words, the value of their productivity. If adding another worker can produce 5 widgets and I get to pay $3 a widget and make $15 out of that one worker's productivity, and it only cost me $10 to do it, well, I ended up with a net gain of $5 there. That's worth it. But at some point, usually because there's finite space in a manufacturing or in a restaurant or wherever it is you're adding your workers to, there's only so much room. Sooner or later, you're going to hit that problem we talked about earlier, diminishing marginal returns. There it is again. Adding one more worker, while total productivity will increase, the productivity of that one worker is going to come down. Maybe now they can only do 4 units at $3 a widget, 4 widgets at $3 a widget. Still 12, but now my net benefit is only $2. How about I do it again? And now I'm only producing 3. I got one more worker, but now, even though total productivity increased by 3, that individual's productivity only went up 3. They can only do 3 because of limited space, access to capital resources and the like. Now they're only going to bring in 3 widgets, $3 a piece, $9. Cost me $10 to hire them. I wouldn't do that. Neither will the average company, of course. There's just no way you can do that. Okay? That's marginal benefit, marginal cost. And that's what they're talking about here with marginal cost. Okay? All right. Marginal benefit. They define it again as the difference or change in what you receive from a different choice. Blah. It's the change in benefit when your input or output changes by a single unit. Right? And again, in productivity for a company, this is pretty cut and dry stuff. But for the average consumer, it's kind of subjective, isn't it? I mean, the utility I get from a cup of coffee may not be the same as the utility you get from a cup of coffee. And so it's a subjective standard. So when you're looking at consumers having to make this choice between marginal cost and marginal benefit, all right? Remember this idea of diminishing marginal utility. Listen, I like pizza as much as the next guy, obviously. That second slice of pizza is never quite as satisfying as that first slice of pizza is. And that third slice is less satisfying even more than the second slice was. So there's your marginal benefit and marginal cost. I'm still getting some satisfaction from that second slice. A little less, but still some from the third slice. By the fourth slice, I feel like I need to go take care of business. And that's the cost. Benefit, or that's the benefit, went down. That cost probably going to stay constant, maybe even went up with each additional slice I ate. Benefit was coming down, cost was going up. Sooner or later, those two are going to pass one another, and I've gone too far. I want to back that up. And that's how consumers and producers make decisions. Now, you may not be aware that I wonder what the benefit of this is. I wonder what the cost is. That's not how we do it. We just know intuitively, based on experience. And sometimes maybe we end up in situations where that additional unit cost us more than we benefited from that additional unit because we didn't know any better. Right? All right. One of the last little things we have in this chapter is this idea of positive and normative economic analysis. Statements. All right? So positive statements are objective, factual. They are conclusions that are based in logic and evidence, and I can prove it to you. All right? 2 types of positive statements. A hypothesis. Unemployment is caused by a decrease in GDP. This test can be, I can test this empirically by analyzing the data or unemployment and GDP. When GDP falls, unemployment rises. Guaranteed. Now, you may be asking yourself, wait a minute, Dr. Reynolds, gotcha. Didn't GDP contract 2 consecutive quarters and we've not lost any? Unemployment's not ticked up at all? You are absolutely correct. Guess what? Unemployment is a lagging indicator. It doesn't always happen right away. So keep an eye on that. I'll bet money right here and now that the unemployment rate is going to start going up. And we will be in a recession. And it's going to be a doozy. Just write that down. That's my own, all right, my own thinking there. All right. But nonetheless, the idea that unemployment is caused by a decrease in GDP, this can be tested and proven to be true. It's a positive statement. It can also be a statement of fact. The sky is blue. It's raining. I just saw thunder. Microsoft is the largest producer of computer operating systems in the world. That is a positive statement. That is a statement of fact. All the positive statements can be false, but as long as they are testable, it's still considered a positive statement. Okay? All right. Normative statements are value judgments. All right? Conclusions based on your own values. And there's no way to test it. We ought to do more to help poor people. I don't disagree. But that is a normative statement. It is not a fact as much as you wish it was. It is just your opinion. Corporate profits are too high. Because we have different values, normative statements often provoke disagreement. These are the very things we're arguing about today. It's what they argue about in Washington. I'll let you in on a secret, folks. If somebody tell me if you can think of any instance where I'm wrong. You can trace every single human conflict down to an argument over the economy. Every single human conflict is about a disagreement over how resources are being allocated at some level or another. That's why I think studying economics is so important, because it is truly, to me, at the root of every human conflict in history. So it's important to understand the difference between positive and normative. All right? You will likely get a test question on this. It's not uncommon for people to present an argument as a positive statement when, in fact, it's normative. And they do so because they're trying to convince you. Emotion is not a fact. Look how much emotion you put into your argument. It does not make it so. So it's important to be able to make the distinction between those two. All right. You'll see this in op-ed in newspapers. You see this in the prime time of every cable news station. There's nothing but normative declarations of all sorts on both sides of the political spectrum. Point 2. Okay? And folks, that brings this to an end. Thank y'all. This was Module 2. And wrap up the work for that, and hopefully we'll move on to Module 3 and 4 and 5, and then we have our first test. So thank y'all very much. I appreciate your time.